So in a recent video, somebody commented because I mentioned that Shopsmith had developed a bandsaw that was a standalone tool. Somebody commented that didn't that go against the idea of a multi-purpose tool? Well, obviously they didn't realize that Shopsmith over the years has made a lot of standalone tools, and a lot of them were under the Shopsmith brand and some were under other brands. So let's go back to the 1950s. What you see here is roughly 1955 Shopsmith Mark V in a little brochure. And a very similar brochure was introduced just a year later. So between 1956 and 1958, the company Magna, who was the parent company of Shopsmith, introduced a whole series of tools that were standalone tools. Some of them were taking components of the Mark V family and bringing them to the masses as standalone tools. So here you can see in this brochure that there's a bandsaw, there's a table saw, a jointer, a jigsaw, a belt sander, and a sprayer or an air compressor. So let's talk about some of these tools and even more, because there have been many, many standalone individual tools under the Shopsmith brand and under other brands. So for example, in 1955, when the bandsaw was introduced, shortly after, the parent company Magna realized that if you put that on a stand, it becomes a standalone bandsaw. So they introduced both the bandsaw and, as you can see below, a table saw. So as you can see here, there's an ad on the left that Magna was using to promote their new table saw, as well as a brochure or owner's manual. And for those of us who know Shopsmith tools, we would recognize that the base that's underneath that table saw is the exact same base that was sold for years as an SPT stand, or special purpose tool stand. This table saw was pretty unique. It was a 9-inch blade, which you might say, well, gosh, that's awfully small. At the time, 10-inch table saws were just unheard of in home shops. And this was a tilting blade or tilting arbor table saw. And some really unique features of this table saw. First off, it had the Shopsmith miter gauge with a pistol grip, which again, outside of the Mark V, no one had that on a table saw. It had a self-correcting fence, just like on the Mark V, slightly, ever so slightly different in that this one could be indexed by turning the little dial that you see underneath the handle on the rip fence. A few other interesting features of this saw, but my favorite was the ability to put this on a stand along with the jointer. So here you can see the jointer that most of us that use Shopsmith tools know as the Shopsmith jointer, but combining that together with the table saw on its own stand, Magna had this combination table saw jointer that was unmatched at the time. Here again, you can see a couple ads for this product as it appeared in magazines. Also, talk about standalone tool, there was the Shopsmith radial arm saw. The Shopsmith radial arm saw was introduced and sold actually by 3 different companies who made the Shopsmith line. It was originally introduced by Magna Engineering or Magna Power Tools, it might have been called at the time. And then it was sold under by the company Yuba, who owned the Shopsmith line. Then it was sold by the company Magna American that produced the Shopsmith line in the 1960s. And when I mentioned Shopsmith, some of you might think, well, wasn't there a Shopsmith table saw? Yeah, there absolutely was. We'll be talking more about this in an upcoming video because someone you know owns a Shopsmith table saw now. Again, another funny ad. I'll always love this one of the Shopsmith radial arm saw. And there you can see down the very bottom the logo that says Magna American. Let's go back to the Magna line. So here's the bandsaw on its own stand being sold as a standalone tool. Again, an ad for this bandsaw. Magna jigsaw. This was the jigsaw that was mounted originally on the Mark V, and now here it's being offered as a standalone tool. So here is that jigsaw mounted on its own stand. Now, the eagle-eyed among you may have noticed that in those line drawings, There's a drill press. Well, that's right. Magna actually had a couple drill presses. Again, part of the Magna line. You could buy this drill press and even an industrial drill press that we'll have to get into at some other point. How about the 6-inch belt sander? This was introduced initially for use on the Mark V, and here you can see the 6-inch belt sander as a standalone tool on its own stand. Now, yeah, there's a funny picture. This was shown in Life magazine, showing the old 10ER back in the 1940s, and all of these tools you see in use, from the little kid buffing the shoes to churning ice cream to using the table saw to buffing your car. All those things were done with the 10ER. But look at Sis over there on the left. She is using a spray gun to paint to paint the wagon. Well, yeah, they had a sprayer or air compressor, and this was originally powered by the Mark V, and here you can see it as a standalone tool. This was a really weird air compressor that we'll talk about one of these days in some detail, but it used garden hose as both the tank and your line for spraying. Back to the joiner, and what made all this possible? They're talking in this little blurb about the twin tubes that are on the bottom. This is how we would mount all of these special purpose tools on the Shopsmith Mark V. This is how they were accomplishing mounting all of these things on a variety of stands, including a single stand and a double stand. And here you can see the double stand in use. Also, notice that from the illustrations on the bottom, there was a single motor that was powering both tools while they were in use. Now, yeah, Shopsmith also made a standalone planer. Sorry for the grainy photograph, but this was the Pro planer. They even had made for them in Taiwan a portable planer at one time back in the 1990s. Then there was the standalone scroll saw, and this was available in several versions, including the latest, most recent version, not available currently, that was in a teal color. How about the overarm pin router? This was made in at least 3 different versions that I'm aware of as standalone, but also was made as an adapter that could mount onto the Shopsmith Mark V. And then there's the Joint-Matic, a joint making machine that I've demonstrated in a couple of videos as well. So yes, Virginia, you can own and use Shopsmith tools as individual standalone tools. You couldn't convince me to get rid of my Shopsmith bandsaw or belt sander or strip sander. I think they are some of the best on the market, especially within their capacity. And if you don't own a Mark V, you don't have to own a Mark V. You can still run these tools as individual tools. So if Shopsmith today ever decides to get back into the market with individual tools, it's something you might want to consider. And in fact, you can today buy a brand new SPT stand or special purpose tool stand to power any of these tools. As I mentioned, a lot more to come on some of these tools. I hope you stay tuned. And in the meantime, make it a great day.